This guy painted me, and you're gonna see how he did it this week on Short Rest Studios. Hey friends, I'm Judd. Welcome back to Short Rest Studios. I recently got my hands on a 3D printed young green dragon miniature from Epic Miniatures, and I painted it up and did its base. So I want to show you how I did it. Alright, here I hit the Epic Miniatures Young Green Dragon Mini with some black primer from a rattle can. Then once that was done, I coat the entire thing with Vallejo Model Color Refractive Green. Just a good organic green olivey kind of base coat. And next I hit it with a thin coat of dark green from Vallejo Game Color. And again, this is just layering. We're just creating a variety of colors by layering on thin coats of slightly different colors that just add some depth. And you can see that wing is looking pretty darn good right now. Moving on to painting a little bit more. And now we're going to hit it with some goblin green, and what I'm doing is just highlighting the fingers, I like to call it. I'm basically just painting those ribs that make up the wings with this goblin green, much brighter than the other colors that are on the model. And I'm experimenting here. I'm trying to see what I like and what I don't. And this is kind of my process, and it does make things take longer, I'm sure, but I like the experimentation, and usually this is the best way for me to figure out if something that is going to work that I haven't done before. And so now I'm taking that same color and I'm going to dry brush it onto the wings just to try to bring out some of the texture, because quite frankly I didn't feel like trying to highlight all the little veins and bumps in his wings. And now I'm highlighting the musculature in his arms with the same color, thin coats as always, very thin coats. And this I'm really highlighting. I'm not getting down into the recesses, I'm just hitting the high points just to try to create some definition in his little arms there. And here we're painting some more ribs on the wings. So now I'm going to take that same goblin green and I'm dry brushing his fin just to see how that looks. And I think it was at this point that I decided I don't really like this. But no, I kept going. So really I'm going through this whole process thinking I'm not sure how this looks, but I'm going to keep going and see what happens, and I'll come back and look at it later and see how I feel about it. So basically I spent a whole lot of time dry brushing different parts and then thinking I'm almost done and I didn't like it. So I'm going to go back to goblin green and take a thin coat of that and coat the whole thing in it. So once again, I'm just layering on some color. There's still those darker colors underneath. This is a thin coat. It's much brighter, as you can see. It dries a little bit darker, but it is much brighter than what was on there before. And I'm just trying to create that depth and make the whole thing pop a little more. And now we're moving to some Vallejo Model Color straight up green, flat green. And now I am highlighting musculature and fingers and all those little things. So my usual bent is to do things too dark, and that's kind of what happened here. I started out doing things too dark, and I just decided that I really wanted to go brighter and not make the same mistake I always made. It doesn't look like there's as much difference here between the flat green and the goblin green. There's not as much of a stark contrast between it as there was between goblin green and the dark green, but it does stand out. It looks a little more obvious in person. So now I'm just taking that color and I'm painting his fin with it. And I decided to basically take all of the wing ribs and his fin and just make them that slightly different color. I'm basically going for sort of slightly different colors all over the body, so it just doesn't look like one homogeneous color, because that doesn't really look natural. And here I am hitting some high points on his face, just trying to create some contrast between his face and the rest of his body in tone. So now I'm taking a combination of Vallejo game color, goblin green, and elfic flesh, and some model color lemon yellow, and I'm painting his underside, his belly, going all the way down to the end of the tail with that color, just to create some contrast there. I thought a brighter surface would look better there, and I'm kind of liking the way this is coming out at this point, but you're going to see I'm going to mess it up. So there's my combination of colors there. You get lemon yellow and flat green that I'm now using to highlight the musculature. So I've painted everything, I'm just doing highlights now of musculature and ribs, fingers, whatever you want to call them, just to break those out from the overall surface, to highlight them. And there you see what they look like. That is kind of a long process. You can see some of the differentiation in color. His wings look a little mottled. That was actually intentional. So now I'm taking that mixture of flat green and yellow, and I am dry brushing it onto the tops of his fin, just to create some contrast, some light there, highlights on the top. And now I'm taking that lemon yellow and I'm highlighting just a couple little detail places. There are some little interesting scale patterns on his sides, and I highlighted those there, and now I'm using that to highlight the other side. And now I'm using that yellow to highlight the scale pattern on his underbelly and his neck. So I'm just running that lightly along the ridges. And now I'm taking a little bit of white, and just the brightest white that I had, and doing the same thing, highlighting again both of those places, just creating a little tiny little line right on top of the previous line, and now I'm putting some of that on top of his fin to add to the highlights there. And now that's some lemon yellow, and I'm just creating some contrast on the tip of his tail. But I also decided I did not like the highlighting on the top of his fin, so I'm doing that now with yellow. So there's this nice little hatchwork scale pattern on the sides of his neck, and I highlighted that with some sun yellow from Vallejo game color. And the contrast looks really stark right now, but we'll take that in a later step. Now we're going to take some game color bloody red and paint the inside of his mouth with that. And basically, you want to try to be careful when you're doing something like this, right? But it's very hard not to hit places that you don't want to hit when you're jamming a paintbrush into his mouth. So then I took some of my refractive green and just highlighted along his lips to cover up some of that excess red that got onto his lips. And it also creates a little contrast between his lips and the rest of his face. which probably isn't noticeable unless you stick your face right down on it. Here I mistakenly picked up elfic flesh to paint his teeth when I meant to get bone white, but it came out looking good, so no big deal. So if you've never done this, like I always looked at this stuff and thought, how in the heck do you paint those little teeth? You just take the edge of that brush and rub it along those points with not very much paint on the brush, and it looks like you spent tons of time painting those tiny little details. And actually I kind of like painting the teeth, because it really starts to pop at that point to me. Now we're taking some dead white and mixing it with a little bit of that bloody red to add a little highlight to his tongue so that it just doesn't look like a red hole. And unfortunately you can't see in there what I'm doing, but essentially there's a contoured raised portion of his tongue, and I'm just painting a little U-shape highlight on that just so you can kind of see his tongue when you look at his face. So funny story here, I'm not sure what color I'm using to paint his claws, because initially I'd intended to paint his teeth with bone white, and I was going to paint the claws with the same thing, but then I picked up elfic flesh and painted his teeth, and then I picked up some of that dead white to mix in with the red. So I think I'm actually painting these with elfic flesh, because at this point I still thought it was bone white. And let's be honest, I didn't notice that the color was wrong. So does it really make a difference? I don't think so. I think they came out looking good, so I'm not really painting that fast, by the way. I just sped up the video, in case you're wondering. This is another experiment that I tried with some black-green game ink on the tips of his claws, just to create like a gradient effect. And it didn't really work out well. The ink wasn't as dark as I hoped it would be. I hadn't really used it before. So I switched to black game color paint, and I did the same thing, basically painted on some black paint on the tips of his claws. And I was kind of trying to go for this look. If you've ever seen like a cow's horns that have this, they fade to a darker color on the tips. That's kind of what I was going for, but it wasn't really working. And so I decided to try to dry brush that black on instead. And still didn't look quite the way I wanted it to, but it was better that way. And in the end, if I were a better painter, this would have been better. But it looks great on the table, so that's what matters in the end. And now I'm doing the same thing to all of his claws, because once I committed, I had to keep going. And now we're going to take that green game ink and we're going to coat the entire thing with it, and it's going to function like a wash. It's going to darken up some of the brighter colors, kind of bring everything a little more in line with each other so that the contrasts aren't quite as high. You still have the highlights, but the whole thing just looks a little more unified. Now here is the mistake. I decided to put that ink on his neck and belly, and in the end, once I finished that, I felt that it was too much and it messed up the effect I had been going for with his belly. It was just a little too bright green, and so I took some of that mixture of green, elfic flesh, and lemon yellow, and that I originally painted the belly with, and highlighted the ridges on the scale pattern with it, just to try to bring back some more definition and some of that brighter color. And when I finished that, I decided it still didn't look quite the way I wanted it to, and I didn't know what to do, so I thought, hey, let's try a brown wash to bring back some more definition, because I didn't want to go all the way black. I felt brown might look a little more organic. Black would probably be too much. But in the end, I didn't feel like this really did it either. It helped a little, but it wasn't enough. And I'm using very thin, small amounts of this stuff. But in the end, it didn't help that much, so I decided to go ahead and try the black wash. And at first, I thought I had just made a muddied mess of it, but it came out okay in the end. Now we got some Sculpey air dry modeling clay, and we're going to make some dragon poop. No, that's not what we're doing. I'm actually going to make a log. So this is something I hadn't really tried to do before. I'm using some some of this air dry clay, I'm just cutting it into a section that'll basically fit, kind of lay across the base. That's why I have the dragon in his base there, just to kind of get an idea of what size I need to make this thing. And so I've rolled it out and now I'm cutting it, ditching the excess, and I'm rolling it out a little bit more just to flatten out those places, or to round off those places where it flattened out when I cut it. And, you know, yeah, smashing the end down. And it's okay if it's not a perfect shape. I mean, this is supposed to be a log, right? It should be some kind of natural organic shape, so it's not going to be a perfect cylinder, and that's not what I'm going for. But so now I'm taking some of my sculpting tools and I'm just making some jagged edges on the ends just to make it look like it's a broken log with that splintered look on the ends. And so I do that on both ends, and I kind of make a divot, an indentation in the ends too, so it has that kind of hollow look. And so now I've got my basic log shape here, and I'm taking another little tiny piece, and what I'm going to do is create a knot hole, or a place where there was a missing branch, just to give the log a little extra texture and make it look a little more like a log, in case I really screwed it up and it doesn't look much like a log without it. Hopefully this will help. So I take that, and that little rolled up bit, and I apply it in a circle, make it a circle, and apply it to the side of the log. And then I use this tool to smooth down the edges a bit. So that's it partially smoothed down. It's not quite done. I actually did that smoothing a little bit more after that point. But now I'm taking another sculpting tool, and I'm just creating some lines in the surface to create some texture, to the impression of bark. And they're not straight. I'm trying to make them look kind of organic and random. And then I take my trusty ball of aluminum foil just to add lightly a little bit of extra texture to the surface. And now I'm applying some glue to the base. While that log is drying, I'm going to go ahead and put some flocking on the base. So I put a little glue on, and I spread it all the way to the edges, trying not to get it on the edges. And now I'm taking some Woodland Scenics blended turf and applying that to the base. I'm not covering every bit because I want to put some other textures. So I get a little bit of play sand that I have in a spice shaker. So I knock off some of that excess play sand. Play sand is nice because it has a variety of textures and different size pieces. So now we're going with some Woodland Scenics coarse turf, which is, you know, just bigger chunks of flocking, and put some of that on there. The key to this is randomness. You just sprinkle it on there. The more random you do it, the more realistic it looks. And now I'm going to spray it with wet water. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, is what we in the model railroading community call wet water. It's just water with a bit of dish soap. And that basically breaks surface tension, so that when I now apply this mixture of PVA glue and water, it doesn't make all my little particles move all over the place if they're not perfectly secured down already, which a lot of them are because there was a good layer of glue underneath there. But I wet that thing down, and then I apply some more of my blended turf, a tiny bit more of play sand, a little bit more coarse turf, just to create some layers of texture. And now I'm going to take this yellow grass fine turf, also from Woodland Scenics, and just sprinkle it lightly over the surface just to kind of create some highlights and things. And I'm just kind of playing around until I get it to the place I like. And then I'm going to apply another layer of that glue. And now just putting on some grass tufts. So I put on a few different kinds of army painter grass tufts just to add some more visual interest to the base. Now I'm taking some burnt umber craft paint, and I'm painting a coat of that onto my primed log that is dried and primed, as you can see. So I'm just putting that burnt umber all over it to give it its base coat, because I feel like brown's too bright, especially if you're going for a dead log. And now we're going for some yellow ochre, which I'm using to paint what would be the inside of the log, so that exposed wood, but also it's dead wood, so I kind of wanted it to have a kind of a darker, sickly kind of look. And these contrasts again are going to look super stark, but we're going to fix that in some later steps. Now I'm taking some classic caramel. Don't eat it, it's paint. And I'm just dry brushing some of that on across the texture lines. I'm going to do this with a couple of different colors. Now, Beachcomber Beige, just to create some depth of color and to hit some of those highlights and make it look more like a log that's been just laying there in the woods for years or months or whatever. So I'll dry brush that all over it. It's looking pretty good. And now that's my homemade black wash. You can check out Black Magic Craft for the recipe for that. I basically did the same thing that he did over there, and I just applied that all over the surface of the log. And now I'm going to take some blended turf, this is the fun part, and mix it up with some white glue to create like a paste, because I want to put some moss on this log. I really want it to make it look old and like it's been sitting in the woods forever. And so I just smear some of this junk on here. And you know, the white glue dries clear. You can't tell it's there. It just looks like some green stuff all over the outside of this thing. So it looks nasty right now when the glue's wet, but it looks really good afterwards. And now I'm just taking a little bit of super glue. Before that's even dry, I'm able to handle it before that's dry, and I'm taking a little super glue and I'm just going to glue it to the base right where I want it. I've positioned the dragon so that I know exactly where the log needs to go, and I'm just going to let that set, and then we'll add the dragon. And now you can see the finished product, and I am actually really, really happy with the way this guy came out. And frankly, I'm probably happiest with the way the log looks. Like, I was really surprised. I've never done it before. I thought it came out really nice, but the whole thing just looks, I think, fantastic. It's not fine art, but it's great tabletop art. A great mini to put on my table and have my players face. So, is this guy perfect? By no means. Does he look great on my tabletop? Absolutely. Did I have fun painting and basing him? For sure. And I got to experiment and make some mistakes and do some things I hadn't really done before. So that was a lot of fun for me. Thank you so much for joining me for another epic adventure on Short Rest Studios. Please, if you got some value out of this, hit the thumbs up down below to like this video, hit the battle axe to subscribe so you can keep up with what we're doing, and we'll see you for another adventure next time on Short Rest Studios.